Thank you, Tom. Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Griffin. I'm with the Confirm SFI Centre for Smart Manufacturing, based at the campus. And I'm delighted to facilitate this particular session today as part of Research Week 2023. And the theme of our discussion today with this panel is really the interlock between research and academics and industry, and that important relationship model that needs to be in place for really great research based on real life use cases. For that to happen successfully, it really is based on the success of bringing those two entities together and working together with the same mindset and insights. I'm delighted today to have 5 great people who come from both the academic side of the house and research side of the house, and also industry. And I'm not going to read out all their bios. I'm going to let them tell you themselves why they're here, why they're on the panel, who they are, who they work for, and what the context is. And once we get these introductions through, we're going to start a conversation around that context of academic and industry collaboration and connection. And we hope that toward the end of it, we hope that you might have some questions too, and we will give you an opportunity to ask some questions. So with that, and starting in no particular order, actually it's the order in which I wrote the notes, not the order in which my guests here are sitting, but I will start with introducing Damian McCarthy, who happens to be on my immediate right. And Damian is a PhD researcher with Confirm, but that's all I'm going to say, because I'm going to ask Damian to introduce himself. Okay, Damian.
Thanks, Dave. So as Dave said, my name is Damian McCarthy. I am PhD researcher with Confirm here on campus, but I'm also systems engineer for SL Controls, who are a systems integrator to med device and pharma manufacturing companies around Ireland. So my research is focused on the application of model-based design to validation of software in manufacturing equipment. So hopefully, I'm in final year of my PhD now, so hopefully we'll be wrapping that up this year, and with a focus on trying to implement that into industry then as I go forward.
Excellent, Damian, thank you very much. And I'm going to go to the far side of our panel here to Professor Sarah Hudson, who is a lecturer in chemistry in the Department of Chemical Sciences at UL and a theme leader in SSPC. So I'll ask you then to fill in the gaps, Sarah.
Okay, so thank you. So yeah, as you said, I'm a lecturer here at UL. I have a research group of the past few years, about 20 researchers, so PhD students, postdocs, research assistants, and I have, I'm in the SSPC, so not everyone might be familiar with the SSPC, but basically it's a national research centre that's based here in UL, but there are about, I'll probably get my numbers wrong now, about 230 researchers nationally, and we have over 50 industry partners with over 50 industry collaborative projects. And I would say, on average, over the past few years, about 50% of my funding is coming from industry academic collaborations. So we work closely together, and as part of that, our researchers all spend time in industry and just build their skill set and their capability. So very excited to talk to you about it here today.
Excellent, thanks, Sarah. And I'll move straight now to Joe Gibbs, who's closer to me here. Joe is the General Manager of LERO, and I'll ask Joe to elaborate on the rest of his bio.
Thanks, Dave. My name is Joe Gibbs. I look after the operations team for LERO. So LERO is one of the 16 SFI research centres. So we're across 12 institutions, somewhere between 250 and 300 researchers across the 7 national universities and 5 of the technical institutes. So the operations team essentially works as like a bridge between industry and academia. And what we do is we work with the researchers to try and put the legal agreements in place, the reporting requirements, the budgets, and everything else. And I suppose a little bit on my own background, I spent 30 years in industry before I came into academia, most of it leading R&D teams for various different multinationals. And my first interaction with a research centre was with LERO, ironically back in 2006, when as an industry partner, When I worked for a company called Snap-on Diagnostics, we did work for them on legacy code analysis. So I'm somewhat of a poacher turned gamekeeper, I think, like a lot of the people in the operations teams in the various research centres. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Moving then to your immediate right, Joe, we've got Dr. John O'Donnell, who is the Technology Director with Johnson & Johnson, very close to us here. So, John, you're very welcome. We'll ask you to fill in the gaps in your bio.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. It's great to be here, and it's great to be reunited with some colleagues that I worked with in the past. Tony, it's been 20 years since I worked with Tony, and it's been 30 years since I worked with Joe. He made me promise not to say that, but that's what you get for some of the things that happened between us in the past. So I work for Johnson & Johnson, who I think everybody is aware of that company here. Our slice of the grand challenge in the world is that of personalized health. And the group that I belong to is an internal research group that is trying to deliver personalized health through innovation in supply chain and in advanced manufacturing. Industry 4.0 is a big buzzword where we reside, and I sit facing a lot of the academic research community, most notably the Confirm Centre that Dave is in, and between us I think we've garnered a lot of insights into the goods and bads and the do's and don'ts of industry-directed academic research. I would say it's not the job of academic research to be industry-led or industry-directed, but I think there are advantages in certain areas where there's a big overlap. We're all united by the grand challenges that exist in the world, and I think there's rich ground for innovation there where there's an overlap.
Thank you, John. And we will come back to a lot of those points you touched on there in relation to grand challenges and so forth. But I'm delighted then for our fifth, certainly by no means least, Dr. Tony Scanlan, who is a Senior Research Fellow in the Department of Electronic and Computer Engineering at UL here. So, Tony, over to you to...
Thanks, Dave. I'm delighted to be here today. So my career here in the university over the last 15 years, I've been quite heavily involved in academic industry partnerships. So my main area of research in the past was in microelectronics and circuit design. So all those projects were very heavily industry guided and focused. More recently, I've been involved with we have a new group in the electronics department, the data-driven computational engineering group. So this group has a slightly different focus, more in the space of artificial intelligence. So that group is working on projects both with LERO and Confirm in the AI space. So that group is about 20 researchers now at this stage and is the largest research group in the electronics department. So that's me very briefly. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks to all of you. I do want to make a point that your program won't have mentioned John. John stepped in at the last minute. We did have somebody lined up from Regeneron, but John very, very kindly just this morning agreed to step into the panel to take that slot up. So John, I want to thank you for being so responsive to that as well. And I think the context of the Johnson & Johnson relationship with University of Limerick, all told, not just with Confirm, I think is one that is always worthy of conversation and understanding the breadth of that. So we might dip into some of that in a little while. So what I'm going to do is start by just doing a round of questions where I'm going to get each of the panelists here just speaking a little bit about their own experience and the context of the research / industry divide from their perspective. I'm going to start with Damian. And Damian, you're what I call sort of a quasi-academic and industry person because you're just finishing your PhD, so you've been very much on the research side with Confirm over the past couple of years, but you're also just taking on a new role with SL Controls. And again, you might just touch on the SL Controls and what they do. You mentioned an integrator, and that's worth maybe explaining that role of a company. But it certainly is an interesting mix in the industry research collective. So what's the advantage you believe you have now as somebody who's been in the research pool, but also now is going to be out there, working with customers on solving problems?
Yeah, so I suppose from my point of view, like a lot of my research is very industry focused on the manufacturing side anyway. So like from being in Confirm for the last couple of years, I got to see a lot of stuff that's now kind of coming to the forefront in industry, things like digital twins, modeling, systems modeling, all of that really we would have been looking at 2 to 3 years ago. So it kind of gives, when you come into industry, it does give you the jump on those kind of topics and kind of what's coming new to industry out of academia.
And you touched on it, you inferred there a little bit, it gives you the jump, so it gives you an advantage as somebody who can bring value almost readily to an organization. That's something we might get into a little later on as well, around maybe we'll talk about careers, but certainly as you go into SL Controls, you can become somebody who can deliver, I suppose, high quality engineering and science-led solutions based on your experience at the research side.
Yeah, so like obviously when you're doing a PhD, there is a lot of focus on the quality of the research. So it does, it forces you to bring that quality into your work. So when you get into industry, then it's already there for you. You're used to producing in-depth documents or detailed research proposals or plans for implementing whatever the challenge is for the customer you're working with at the time. So it does give you it helps you build a lot of skills for if you're facing a problem you haven't seen before. That's probably the key thing with a PhD, is that you're looking at something very few people have looked at before. So you're used to not knowing the right answer going in and having to figure that out and kind of troubleshoot it as you go.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I'll go back to you, Sarah, and as an investigator with SSPC, and you alluded earlier on to, you've worked on a lot of projects across industry as well. SSPC, again, there's because it's an SFI center, you've got that spectrum of research that needs to be at this excellent science level, which is very low TRL, and then really probably a lot of the work you do with industry partners then tends to be more at the application level, or at least getting to a point of being applicable, I guess. So how do you manage that divide when you're immersed in a very scientific world?
Well, I suppose for the most part, often what you're doing is applying the skill sets that we have and the unique skill sets within, say, my research group or the SSPC network and the infrastructure that's available within academia. We have fantastic infrastructure thanks to the investment from the SFI over the past few years or past decade. But what we have that industry don't have is the freedom to use it for all manner of applications and testing, often of which there's a lot of fundamental science and engineering behind. So while projects are often quite applied with industry, there's always things that you observe and you see that you can explore on the side. It is always challenging, as a postdoc, if you're at your postdoc stage, you want to publish, but then you're working with industry, and so you run into some challenges. But for the most part, industry are interested in publishing as well, and they're interested in the fundamentals of what's happening behind their applied science or engineering, because that allows them to future-proof. They don't want to just find out or get it working. They want to understand why it's working now and why it wasn't before, so that for their next product or their next technology, they have that knowledge and they can rationally explain, the logic behind things. So people often say, oh, it's applied. That doesn't mean there's not a lot of very exciting science and engineering behind what you're doing. So, and it's naive to think that industry don't do a lot of very exciting research themselves. They do. And they do it in collaboration with us, but they do it by themselves too. So I'm not sure if that answers.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does, and I think that's a very good point. We underestimate industry quite often as well, and I think that's probably based on what sector that industry is in, because some sectors, I guess, will be more attuned to the need for research than others.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, I'm in the pharmaceutical medicine research area, and it also depends on what activities are happening, you know, on the different sites. So obviously there's, you know, in Ireland we've a lot of pharmaceutical manufacturing, and sometimes the processes and protocols are very set, and so then you're really only troubleshooting when something goes wrong. But that said, I would say there's, especially now, modern life, you know, you don't need to be in the same country to contribute to research and development in many international companies.
And if I could just ask a question.
Sure, John.
And do you find that sometimes industry can curtail some of the freedom maybe that's needed to drive some of this exploration or discovery? Because that's one of the
absolutely. Well, they have to justify. They have to go back to and try and justify it. So to some extent, yes. But sometimes what I find is an applied project might give me ideas of other things that can be done, and then I can do those on the side or through another funding mechanism. So, you know, it's all good.
Very good. And do, like John there, feel free to cross-talk here as well. There's no set rules. I want to go to you, Joe. General Manager, you explained the role in LERO. LERO, it's a centre of software research. So, you know, it's like some of the SFI centres particularly have a particular segment, so if it's pharma, if it's manufacturing industry, if it's ICT, if it's photonics, etc., etc. But as software, I guess that gives you a much broader view of in industry as a whole, as to who might be advantaged by working in research on software. Does that make your job harder or easier in having a bigger pool?
I think always, I suppose, the danger is that you could lack focus, in that you could just take on everything and anything, because software is so pervasive, it's everywhere. I mean, when we put together the current research agenda, what we tried to do was to look at certain sectors where we had expertise, domain expertise, if you like. So we selected 6 domains that we would put a degree of focus on, and they range from smart cities and autonomous vehicles and smart agriculture to health and well-being, to GovTech and FinTech. Now, if I take the latter 2, for instance, we wouldn't have the same level of experience in those areas, domain expertise, as we would have perhaps in the autonomous vehicles and smart cities, and to some extent in the AgTech. So that helps to some extent to focus some of the efforts in going out to look for new industry partners. But at the end of the day, a lot of what we do, particularly in terms of software engineering, so if we look at the various different reasons for engaging with a research centre, it's not always just about solving a technical problem. And increasingly what we have seen is that it's about everything from how do we develop software, or the techniques and processes we use, which is a fundamental part of LERO and has been from the very beginning, right through to the governance, the ethics around the use of the software, the development of the software, if there's data as part of the product or the service. So that, again, broadens it out. But I suppose in those cases, what we're trying to do is to say, well, look, our expertise is in, you know, we bring in extra researchers, if you like. We've opened up opportunities for sociologists, for psychologists, for medical people to work within the centre. But at the same time, you know, it's within a certain research agenda that we've set. So that governance, the governance and ethics around the development of software, around AI, is part of the centre. We've focused on specific domains, but as I said, at the same time, things like development of software in an agile environment or in a regulated environment could apply from anything from automotive to pharmaceutical and to lots in between. So it's a bit of a roundabout way of saying it, I suppose. I don't think it makes our job more difficult from the point of view of finding opportunities. I do think it does mean we have to be a little bit careful about sticking to our research agenda as much as possible and saying, well, look, that's interesting and that's interesting, but this is what we've said we're going to do, and this is what we're going to stick with.
We might come back again to, are there ways that, you know, when you talk about building relationships with industry partners, you know, you've got 16 SFI centres, and quite often, I'd imagine, there are companies out there who get hit on by several. And are there inefficiencies in that model? We could chat about that maybe later on.
Yeah, but I think one point I would like to make, I suppose, that might be of interest to the audience. When people think of the SFI centres and they think of projects that typically for most of us, they're probably between 1 and 4 years. You know, we don't tend to take on shorter projects because we have to recruit people to work on those projects, and people are interested in at least 2 to 4 years of a commitment. So then when you look at that, you kind of think, well, obviously you must be engaging with all the big multinationals, particularly the American multinationals. And yes, we do work with IBM, we've done work with Microsoft, we've done work with Intel. But when I look at our biggest industry partners, leaving aside Huawei, which some of you may know we have a large research program with, many of them are actually either continental European companies like Liebherr and Logitech, German and Swiss, or they're indigenous Irish companies like Dairymaster and Combilift. And what we're finding is that certainly with some of these companies, they have very strong competencies in mechanical engineering, in electrical engineering, but they're struggling to develop that expertise in software. And so through engaging with those, and I think this may be interesting to PhDs and postdocs, through engaging with those in projects, yes, it's helping to build their knowledge, it's helping to solve some technical problems, but increasingly they're looking at recruiting people from those projects into the companies to help to build that expertise and that knowledge within the company. So for instance, Liebherr have recently hired a new R&D manager and a new software engineering manager. Both of them have come from projects that we have done with them. But even again, I often cite this, and I'll finish on this, but some years ago I sat in a meeting in Dublin with IBM, and I think there was about 10 people in the room from IBM, and we were discussing future projects. 6 of those people had come through LERO at various times. So I think for somebody who is considering a career either in industry and wants to develop expertise or knowledge or relationships or find out what it's like, these type of research projects are an excellent opportunity to do it. And even if you want to stay in research and you want to stay within the academic community, they help you to develop an understanding of the companies and the businesses that you may ultimately be funding your research. Sorry, I'll leave it at that. Great.
No, Joe, very good points, to be fair, and I think they relate to all our experience, certainly up here. I want to turn to John. So, again, the perspective now from the industry side, and, you know, just like you mentioned, Joe, that you've got a big client who has a program of research. J&J have a significant program of research over the last number of years with Confirm. And that's an example, I think, of an organization that takes a view on research as an important asset and as an important thing that they need to do. John, can you explain for us, sort of in short, if you can, that journey for J&J locally here, and how that research journey has landed here?
Yeah, so actually, just to pick up on something Joe said there from the industry side, one of the biggest problems J&J, and I'm sure other industries have as well, is skills and getting the people to do the job you want. And it's an Ireland problem. It's not just a problem of various companies. They just don't exist in Ireland. And one way to stimulate that is through engaging with the academic community. So if we can set the themes in the right way, the people that come out of those academic programs are pre-qualified in a way for some of the key roles that we need, and so we see that working very well from our perspective as well. In terms of the projects and the engagement with the community from our perspective, I think the big advantage we see, in addition to the people advantage, is the opportunity to set the grand themes, the grand projects. Research that's a series of once and done projects is not of so much value for industry. And I think industry has the perspective to be able to maybe set some of those themes and grand challenges. If you think of the NASA moonshot, everybody in NASA was working on one thing, and just because the projects at a base level seem very distinct, they're not. They're all serving a key purpose. And in the case of our projects in Confirm, the ones that we're working with you guys on, those are the themes of manufacturing for the future, digitalized manufacturing. And you'll see themes in there like the smart factory, where the factory of the future, we believe, is going to be comprised of autonomous machines, not receiving control from outside at all, nearly in a way that humans could operate. So that needs artificial intelligence, it needs sensing, it needs vision, it needs computation, and needs robotics. And I think when that day arrives, when the machines can just look around them and figure out what I need to do next, then we're truly into what we call multi-SKU manufacturing, where each object that's manufactured is customized for an individual patient, and that's the future. So I think the engagement with Confirm and the other academic institutes as well has been very successful for us. And just the last point on this, I think all too often industry partners tend to want maybe the academic researchers to contribute to projects that are on the go for now, and that's not what we see at all. We see it's actually building up an ecosystem in the country, a centre of excellence in whatever area it needs to be.
Very good, and I think we'll have more conversation, I think, before we finish on some aspects of what you said. And I am really interested in that context of, you need leadership at the industry side to actually take on and fight for, in some cases, with some industry sectors who have operations, say, here in Ireland, probably have to fight harder to get the autonomy and the resources in which to invest in research. Some, medtech, for example, or pharma, they tend to be the kind of companies who take a view that research is a key asset of what they have. There are other segments of industry, however, that need a lot more convincing. But also, even when you convince, I think they need a lot more value proposition and proof points in order to win the resources to do it. And I think that's a continuous challenge in some areas of industry. We can possibly come back to that. But I do want to come on to Tony here. Tony's in terms of your background and some input from you on your journey. I did notice in your bio that you did spend some years, maybe not that many, but certainly enough, in analog devices, which I guess would have given you some insights into day-to-day industry, running operations, running, output, which is obviously a big KPI, was getting your operations in your manufacturing. So how has that influenced what you've done subsequently in the academic world?
Yeah, so that experience was extremely valuable. So I would have come straight from an undergraduate degree into that role in analog devices. So obviously, you'd know nothing about industry at that point in your career, but I think what you learn is all the processes, how is a team organized, what are the different functions, all the team members perform, how a big organization manages to get, like, in our case, chips out the door, silicon chips. It's not straightforward. So learning all those processes definitely really helps when you, well, in my case, I went back into academia to do my PhD, but I was bringing all that experience of, how to organize yourself into my PhD, along with technical knowledge as well that I picked up during that period in industry. So I think it's very valuable, and I think it's valuable for anybody to cross over and back between the two domains really at any point in their career, whether you get that experience as I did you know, after your undergraduate, or whether you're doing your PhD in conjunction with an industry partner, or you finish your PhD and, you know, do some years in industry and then come back again. I think, you know, the fluidity is there in kind of today's workplace for that type of career structure now. Yeah,
no, excellent. I think certainly there's worth in thinking about what is an ideal, whether it's an industry person you're trying to create who maybe have an academic background, in your case, Damian, or whether you have somebody who actually cuts their teeth in the cut and thrust of industry and the business end of things, and then, you know, so somewhere along the middle. I think what we're aligning on is that there's value in having experienced both sides of that divide. That certainly brings something to either. Sarah?
I think most researchers, certainly at their PhD stage or even postdoc stage, they might, in their minds, think they have a preference, but ultimately they have to wait and see what opportunities come their way. And it's our job to make sure that they're prepared for whether those opportunities are in industry or in academia. Because we all know the struggles to get a permanent academic position, to find the right industry position. And I think a lot of our research programs, I think across all the research centres, have a secondment to industry. And we've talked to industry recently. You know, sometimes our secondments for the PhD students are only 3 months, which actually isn't quite long enough for the industry to get benefit out of the secondment. And maybe the industry guys can say whether that's true or not. Their ideal is 9 months. And we are looking to try and work that into our future research programs so we take on board the feedback from the industry, but also keeping in mind that ultimately they have to have a PhD thesis with significant academic quality to be a PhD, as well as get all those experiences that will enable them to have choice and for doors to open for them.
Very, very good. One of the topics that it often comes up in conversations when you're having your first engagements with an industry partner who don't have a record really of the research journey, and the typical question is around time horizons and ROI, return on investment, and I think that's one of the overarching challenges that we have on the research side in trying to convince the industry partner that research is a longer game. Research is a grander thing that really should set out to try and change landscape and be a shapeshifter in how an organization is doing something. You know, anything shorter, like a 6-month project is an engineering project, solving an engineering challenge, typically, or a scientific challenge. But the research is a longer game. How do you, and I'll ask anybody here, how do you view that challenge, and what are the best ways to get around that? Return on investment, you know, lots of SMEs particularly are looking for very short ROIs because they have to survive. So how do you overcome practically that challenge of getting, because quite often when a project kicks off, one project can be enough to seed more and more to happen, and then something grows. So, but how do you get that first project off the ground and convince that the time horizon is something that they can live with, and the ROI is something they can live with? Joe, have you any views on that from your side?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, because you're coming at it, I guess, from...
my career has been industry. Yeah. I am coming at it from an industry perspective.
Yeah, but I've spent 30 years in industry on the R&D side of it, and I think the interesting thing is, having spent 8 years in LERO, it doesn't come up as much for us. And I think the part of the reason for it, and I'd be interested to hear even yourself and maybe Sarah, is that we deal with R&D groups for the most part. We don't tend to deal with operations teams. And from my own time in industry, there's always a tension between R&D and manufacturing. Yeah. And even when you're discussing an R&D project of 3 to 4 years to produce a new product, manufacturing isn't happy. And there's that tension between the two organizations. So we tend to deal predominantly with R&D groups in LERO. And the reason and the result of that is that, yes, occasionally you have discussions around outputs, but not so much ROI. It's more about, well, I'd like to see some results in 6 months or 12 months or whatever. And the way we tend to approach it is, well, look, if you're prepared to go for the long haul here and a decent sized project, we'd suggest a postdoc and maybe 1 or 2 PhDs. If it's a thing that you want results reasonably quickly, then even on a 2-year project, you need to have postdocs involved because you can't have that ramp up time. But what I'm talking about here is results. It's not necessarily ROI. So what you might have is a report in 6 months that says this is the landscape as we see it, this is where we're going. And then you may make corrections even to the research project. Then just, I suppose, one caveat is that if you're dealing with SMEs, I do accept it's different because often an SME or a small company is looking to a board of directors that's saying, well, I put in $500,000 and where did it go? I want to see results. So again, we don't tend to deal with that many very small companies, and the sweet spot for us has tended to be those 250 to 500 employees, the likes of a Combi Lift, the likes of a Dairy Master, companies like that McHale, they're indigenous Irish companies, they're making the first moves towards doing research, but they do accept the longer term horizons and they're not directly answering for every cent or every euro back to a board of directors on a monthly basis.
Yeah, and actually AMCS is another one. Tony, you've been involved in
would
that
be a
project.
typical,
I mean, what were you involved in the early discussions around getting that off the ground?
That would have been, I suppose, really an ideal situation that, we didn't have too much difficulty kind of convincing them of the value we were bringing, and I think, we didn't have to twist their arm or we didn't have to convince them, that the money was going to be spent in a particular way. They were happy that we were bringing in PhDs, that there was going to be, as you say, results over, a 2-year time period. So they've been reasonably satisfied with how things have gone on. But I think, a lot of it was just setting the expectations up front and, I suppose letting them know that it wasn't a contracting situation, that the university is about training students, more than anything. So there's an education component. So I think getting those kind of messages across to them in the first place is really the primary thing.
Yeah, so I think there's a very important expectations question here, and there's this famous valley of death, the technology valley of death. I don't know if you've heard of it, but usually industry sits on the safe side of it, and the academics sit on the low TRL side of that. So if ROI is the first question you're asking about at the inception of a particular project, I think it's probably the wrong place to be starting that project. The benefits to industry are more around being part of the story. So industry collaborators want to be part of this technology story as it unfolds, and it's about advancing the local ecosystem, especially around the developing local talent as well. So I think that's where the internal justification tends to happen for these types of things inside J&J for sure.
Okay.
And can I just add to that?
Sure, Joe.
I think if you focus on the output as being purely a technical solution, then it's a risky situation to be in that, yes, that's the goal, but you're also developing talent, you're developing knowledge and expertise, and you're potentially providing resources to that company in the long term. And even if it doesn't go to that company, it goes into the ecosystem, and potentially the company benefits from it in the longer term. So yes, you may start out with a technical problem to be solved, and most of, I guess in fairness, most of the conversations do start that way. But I think it is important to emphasize that there are other benefits to the project as well, and do that at the outset, not 2 years in when you haven't had the technical results and you're trying to find excuses for, yeah, it's still of value. So.
Very good point. Sarah?
Yeah, just to echo, it's not contract work. We do collaborative work. And if they want contract work, there's labs that do that. That's not what academic and industry collaborations are about. And From my part, you know, track record is really important, and as a research centre, you know, it enables you to build a track record relatively quickly compared to being an individual PI. And even then, my own projects that I might have done with industry outside of the research centre, we do start small. We might do a small project to build confidence in our capability, and inevitably it has developed into PhD type projects. And so you have to be open to doing that bit of work initially to demonstrate you have the capability and the knowledge. And then just one last point is, to my mind, these collaborative projects, it's not necessarily to create a product for industry. It's to create a concept that this technology is worth exploring, or this approach, or this is, you know, so that's what the collaborative work is about. And then industry can run with it or they cannot run with it, but at least they have an answer to their question of whether it's something that is worthwhile doing.
Very good. And the mention of technology development, it kind of leads me into something I've been listening to a lot about, seeing a lot about, but I think it's very relevant to bring it up in the context of research as well. And that's the technological development that we're seeing all around us now, particularly around AI, and you know, the rapid, almost exponential gain in capability of AI modeling that seems to be happening now. It's almost causing, you know, people all over, you know, business and industry and academics, you know, it's called putting the frighteners on people. I'm trying to get you in again, Damian, and you know, what are your thoughts on what's now available at people's fingertips in terms of AI models, and what impact do they have, or potentially could they have, on pure research?
Hang on, I'll go up there and see.
Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, it's just a tool, really. I know it's a fantastic tool and it can do some amazing things, but at the end of the day, it's a tool that researchers can use. You still need to be able to critically analyze the data that comes out of it, or the feedback it gives you, to see, you know, is it correct, number one, and is it actually of use? So I think, you know, it's, you know, you'll hear everyone say, you know, all our jobs are gone now, we can all go home. But you still need to be able to interpret the information coming back, and find a use for that information then as well. So it's a tool as much as anything else. It's going to speed up research, but it's not going to replace, you know, the critical thinking you need to actually implement a research project or get it off the ground.
Any other points, Joe?
Can I add something to it? I suppose my background's automotive, and so I was as interested as anybody when Elon Musk was forecasting that we'd all be driving autonomous vehicles by 2020. We're not, and we won't be for some considerable time to come. Interestingly, we also are doing a lot of research on deep fakes at the moment, which they reckon is, you know, that if you want to talk to the scaremongers, it's going to mean that we can't believe anything that's on TV anymore, we can't believe anything in the media. And now we have ChatGPT. Where I think research provides value with these kind of things, and I listened to a presentation on the work that we're doing on deep fakes, is that what we're doing is looking at the positive values of deep fakes and how deep fakes can actually be a positive influence in the world. So take, for instance, one of the examples that was given was David Beckham speaking to, you know, a dozen different nationalities in their own languages to talk to them about some social problems or something, you know, getting some information out there. But because of the celebrity part of it, it meant that it got an audience that it wouldn't otherwise get. Somebody else, I believe, has actually redone JFK's last speech, the one he never did. Now, these are interesting things that researchers, I think, can actually turn a spotlight on, you know, take it away from the tabloid headlines, if you like, and actually analyze and look at these new technologies, these new ways of doing things, and actually say, let's not all rush around feeling this is going to be the end of the world. Yes, certainly there are things we need to be concerned about, we need to be educated about, we need to understand. But there are positives to all of this as well. And in other words, to bring balance to these arguments. And I think research in particular can do that in a way perhaps that social media and the popular media can't do, because it's much more fun to say the end of the world is coming because of this.
So,
Very good, John.
So now, so the rise of AI has been touted as one of the 10 end of the world scenarios, but I think in the meantime, we have. I mentioned earlier that automation, which is bringing a wealth of advantages to our world. The next step in that is autonomization, where our systems, our manufacturing and supply chain systems operate autonomously. They don't need a master brain up in the sky to tell them what to do. I think that day is coming. As for AI and ChatGPT itself, I think we should look on it as, you know, the 21st century version of the tractor or whatever it is. It's just another layer of technology that shifts the things that the workforce is working on. It won't eliminate jobs, but it will make us work on different things and hopefully more interesting things.
Very good. Any thoughts aligned with that or different to that?
Yeah, so I suppose I should say that, like, it's really 10 years since deep learning happened. And I suppose what we've seen is the adoption of those technologies, you know, into like that project you mentioned there with the MCS. That's a deep learning based system for recognizing contamination in recycled waste. So it's actually using AI. And then also in the automotive space, there's a lot of adoption, you know, of various image recognition technologies. Again, they're not creating, you know, automation or self-driving cars. They're a stepping stone. They're helping us, you know, build, you know, better and safer cars, you know, but eventually we might get to where we want to go, to the level 5. But in the in the interim, there is actually impact from the technology. But I think, you know, with the new stuff like the GPT-4 and all the DALI and all the generative AI, like that's the new hype. Hard to know where that exactly will go. Like, it definitely is the social impact, as Joe's been talking about. But I think maybe from a research perspective, you know, it might, you know, help you code faster. So that's going to help a PhD, you know, build a system again for an autonomous vehicle more quickly. So I think we'll see impacts like that. Hopefully, that, you know, it won't be that I'll lose my job. It'll be that I can be more productive in the future.
Very good, yeah.
Just to jump in, I can't write a thesis. I've tried.
My comment on it would be that absolutely, I see it helping give direction, because it can you know, it can show you trends, it help give direction to research. But ultimately, rubbish in, rubbish out. You need good data, and you'll need to generate data to create the systems. But then you also need to generate data to verify that the outputs from the systems are correct. And I do think the curse of the modern PhD is the amount of data you have access to. It's like, how do you navigate it? It's not easy.
Very good. I'm conscious that all the talking has been happening up here. We must have a couple of questions out there that have been spurred on by these great inputs from our panel. Anyone have any questions they want to give us? John has one here. Yeah, and we have one here as well. Yeah,
Thanks,
John.
Dave. Yeah, so I guess it came up early on. Sorry, I'm John Gleeson. I'm CEO of the Confirm Centre. So I came up early on, and Joe raised it, and about, I guess, it's absorptive capacity. You mentioned that some of your own kind of researchers have gone into a company. I don't know if it was CombiLift, Joe, it might have been somebody else. And I guess, you know, we've got J&J as well. And I guess a lot of the time when we collaborate with companies, you collaborate, and it can be kind of transactional. You take their money, you tell them thank you very much, and you give them an update every 6 months in the form of a report that's just emailed. And then you have a final closeout meeting and all that kind of stuff. And you might even report an impact out of it. You know, we've all done it. Well, sorry, some people have done it for, you know, to capture some KPIs. But I guess to have a real impact to the company, you need somebody within the company to take the results and kind of interpret them and localize them for the company. and I guess it's probably a question really for J&J, but I'd be interested in commentary from Sarah as well, on kind of that next step rather than, you're almost into the dreaded triple helix, to insert another buzzword. And I guess how can you foster that from a company perspective and then also from a centre perspective? And look, I'll respect the fact that I'm in an audience, so I won't give a confirmed point of view, but maybe Damian can give it. Thank you.
Well, from my point of view, like, you do need to have kind of, a champion inside the company. You need to have someone who is interested in the research, wants to see the benefits of it, but understands that it is research at the same time and that the results mightn't be what they want to see. But it's any new innovation that comes in, no matter whether it's, across society or within a company, you always need someone to champion it, to kind of push it on and actually get it implemented. So I would say, for projects that are collaboration between academia and industry, you do need someone on the industrial side who really wants to make the research happen. It can't just be that, the company is giving you 50,000, 100,000, whatever it is, and they're expecting results. It has to be that they're interested in the research and the results that are coming out of it, whether it's what they want or not.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'd like to pick up on one of Sarah's points to kind of plug a paper as well. So the notion that, that this two worlds paradox isn't as big really, that industry and academia work quite well together, but that it's not always about the product. So funded by SFI, right, my group, we actually econometrically evaluated over a 10-year period the collaborations between the SFI research centres, the 16 of them, and the impact on firm level innovation. And that was what we did using this kind of panel data. What was interesting that we found was, well, it was a good outcome, SFI were happy, but that's besides the point, was that it drove much more of the R of R&D than the D part. So what it did was really it drove that kind of breakthrough research, the scientific research. And I think what was interesting about that is it brought, that leads to kind of breakthrough innovations. It leads to more disruptive innovations. And I think often when we talk about R&D, it's like as if R&D, but there's two elements to it. There's the R and the D bit, and the impact on firm level innovation was actually on the R part. So just to throw that into the mix.
That actually sounds brilliant to me. I'm delighted that that's what the analysis came out as, because I think that's what our role really should be, rather than producing products or for anybody. And I suppose the other thing that we find a little difficult is sometimes a project might end, industry won't tell you what they're going to do with it, because they don't want to tell you. Like, they could well be taking it further, but they don't always tell you. And I would agree 100%, you need a champion. And some of the programs I've had collaborations with, say, for example, the Marie Curie European Industrial Doctorate, there's an industry supervisor of the PhD student as well, so that they have true buy-in to the projects and the concepts. But no, is the paper out yet?
Yeah, it was published there a while ago in a journal called Research Policy. And just one final point, we looked at it in different time periods, 1 to 2 years, 2 to 4, beyond the 4, and obviously the longer the collaboration went on, or if it was a repeat kind of collaboration over time, you were more likely to get more of the impact on that R. So I leave it there, thanks.
And that is true. I mean, it's rare that a collaboration with industry stops at one project. Well, from my experience, I don't know what other people...
I think the best collaborations are where there's multiple projects that follow on from each other, and you actually manage to keep the research teams more or less, at least with an overlap, maybe not fully intact, because we've seen it certainly with Logitech in particular and with Valeo Vision Systems in particular. And I suppose just one point in that, because I think it's worth mentioning, you talk about a champion within the company, and we've talked about people going from the research teams to the companies. Valeo is probably our second biggest industry partner, and we've been working with them now for about 5 or 6 years. And they've had maybe 5, 6 projects with us. But not alone have PhDs and postdocs gone to them, but 3 of their research people have come in. So there's now 2 here in UL, Kieran Ising, whom some of you will be familiar with, and Patrick Denny, and Brian Deegan has joined in NUIG. And the first thing each of those guys is doing when they come back in is to try to keep those relationships, get more projects going, whether it's with the company or with another company. So I think that's the ultimate goal with a lot of these relationships, is where you get people going in both directions. Yeah. Then you know that you can really have significant benefit over a long period of time.
If I could just come in on that, I think we're only just starting to see the benefit of the research centre structure in Ireland now, because the people that have come out of them as PhDs or postdocs are climbing the ranks in the industry to the people,
to positions where they can engage. Yeah.
Great. True symbiotic relationships, I guess, is how you describe it.
I mean, very brief on that as well. I think when you're engaging in the course of a project, of course, it's important to talk about the progress of the project itself. But to me, that's secondary. I think the most useful conversations that happen are the ones that are around where could this go next? After this phase is finished, what's coming next? I think, as I mentioned earlier, the idea of super teams and connected projects is of huge value and is a real multiplier there.
Absolutely. Any more questions from the floor? We have, yeah, Christine? Anyone like to have a go at that?
Well, I would like to see one that considers the people first. What are the skills that are needed in Ireland? And we have a notion in J&J that there could be a continuum of career progression that starts maybe with PhD students and ending up with engineering fellows in J&J, and something similar in other companies as well, I presume. And I think thinking about that first would set the flavour of research that we might want to pursue in Ireland, without directing it too closely, because we don't want to do that either.
I think a challenge over the phase 2 for centres has been this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 model. It's not a place for a discussion about it, other than the principle behind it of, I think what's important for the centres is fundamental research. And yes, the industry collaborations are very important and important to fund it, and yes, EU funding to an extent as well. But I think any new structure that's in place has to look at protecting or ring-fencing that fundamental research piece, and not, you get the behaviour that you drive in terms of KPIs and metrics. And I think the metrics and KPIs that have been in place for the last 6 years will tend over time to drive centres to focus on purely industry not purely, but more on industry collaborative projects and EU projects. I think that's a danger, and it's something that new group needs to look at and make sure that it's addressed going forward.
Just to add in very quickly, I agree with everything said there. I think there also needs to be some level of flexibility. If you're writing a research program, you have your core research program for your grand challenge and where you think you need to go. but there needs to be some degree of flexibility to change direction, because you'll do your first couple of years of research and then you'll go, hold on, we were wrong, we need to go in this direction. And there has to be, I think the older phases of the funding, there was very little flexibility to be able to change the low TRL level stuff. So that would be what I'd like to see.
Okay. Great. And with that, we've just, Christine, did you have another?
No, that's really, really, really helpful, actually. Thank you,
We got
because
one
there's
at the
still
back.
time
We've got
to inform.
Katrina, before we close.
Making you run. Great discussion so far. Katrina Bradley is my name, business engagement here at the TTO office in the research office. The research has shown that companies who engage once with a company for research and innovation are more likely to engage again with more universities. So I'd love to hear how your strategies for maintaining that you hold on to that company, or have you found that competitiveness with and against other centres or universities?
We can't get rid of them.
I think what we found is from the centre point of view that the centres have been a great platform to introduce successful companies that have had a successful project with one institution, to be able to introduce them to researchers in other institutions. So I hate to keep coming back to Valio, but they've done work with us initially through NUIG or University of Galway, and then with Maynooth, and now more recently with UL. Logitech have been working here with us in UL for the last 4 or 5 years, but now they're starting to look at maybe doing some work in UCD and MTU. So I think when you build a relationship with a company, it again opens up the opportunity that if there are skill sets for future projects with companies that can't be addressed in the particular institution that you started that relationship with, that there's the opportunity to continue to grow it across multiple institutions. And in a sense, I think that embeds the company more, certainly in the centre, and it opens up opportunities for other institutions as well. So.
Great, folks, we've actually run over, which is something I didn't think we'd do. But this conversation obviously has more legs to it. And I think we probably have another half an hour of discussion if we had time. But unfortunately, we don't, and we'll call a close to the session. I want to thank our panelists here, Sarah, Tony, John, Joe, and Damian, for being very generous with their time, but also with their sharing of their experiences. And I want to say thank you very much to you for also attending for us today, the first day of Research Week 23. So thank you very much.